Reclaim is a podcast for women, by women, on conversations that matter, with your host, Thais Sky. Together, we will explore the questions of what does it look like to reclaim our sovereignty, our worthiness, our voices as women in this messy world. No topics are barred as we offer roundtable discussions on life, spirituality, politics, and what it means to be a woman in the modern age. Let's do this. Hello, everybody. Thais Sky here. Welcome to Reclaim the podcast. I am in my closet in Los Angeles, California, and I have with me today, well, not literally with me, but the interview that I have for you all today is with Kate Courageous. This conversation is, I don't know, I tend to find that all of my conversations are really fucking good. This conversation is about failing. It's about courage. It's about joy. And what does it mean to navigate all of these kind of principles that we talk a lot about in the self-development coaching world, but from a slightly different perspective, a more grounded perspective. I love Kate. I love her energy. I love her work. And I know you're going to find so much value in this conversation. But first, as always, thank you for those of you who have supported my Patreon, who are currently supporting my Patreon, who are there with me on Patreon. Let me tell you what, the support you all are giving me on Patreon is so life-affirming. It's so affirming. It means that this podcast is resonating with you. It means that you want to see it going. It means that you want to support this work so that I can get somebody to help me with production. I mean, that would be so helpful for me. So if you're not a Patreon pledge yet, you can go to patreon.com/Thais Sky. You can learn more about Patreon if you're not familiar, and you can pledge as little as $1 to support this podcast. So something I've been thinking about a lot is my Brazilian identity. You know, I've been talking a lot about my whiteness and what it means to be a white-appearing woman in this country. But I'm also an immigrant, and I do have that intersection of identities. And what does it mean to be a white Brazilian? What does it mean to come from Brazil? What does it mean to unpack my whiteness from the context of what whiteness looks like in Brazil and also here? It's been a really interesting journey, and I want to share with you an insight that I had, a moment, an aha experience of unpacking how culture really gets under our fingernails, and we really believe the cultural narratives. So when I moved to the United States, I did not want to learn English, and I was pretty rebellious of the fact that I did not want to learn English. And in fact, I vividly remember that one of my favorite books at that time was a book about a little Asian immigrant, and the title of the book was I Hate English. I should look that up and see if it's still around. I loved that book because I hated English. I didn't want to be here. I didn't want to move to the United States. My entire family was in Brazil. I didn't want to be here. And I think we moved here in July. So school started at the end of August, September. And I remember my first day of school. It was fucking traumatizing because everyone was speaking a language that I didn't know. And I also vividly remember going home and saying to my mom, I need to learn English. And within 2 to 3 months, I was fluent in English. And I went on to become, an AP student and straight A's and graduated top of my class. So I went from really hating and abhorring English to really embracing it, right? And I think about that a lot, about the pride that I used to take, even just a few months ago, of this idea that I learned English so fast. Why is there pride in that? We live in a culture where we want everyone to kind of be the same. And to be an English speaker as an immigrant is considered like being a good immigrant. You're assimilated. You've become a part of our culture. But at what expense? Because yes, I learned English in 3 months. Yes, that's such a great, proud thing. But why didn't, at school, they say to me, look, we're going to teach you English, but we're also going to help you in your Portuguese. Because that's important too. Hold on to that too. Allow yourself to develop both. I never heard that. What I heard was learn English, and the faster you do, the better you'll be, and you'll be able to get along in this culture. And wow, that's so great that you've become such a good story of what it can look like to move to this country and go from, making no money to being where you are. And oh, this is so inspiring. You're like living the American dream, et cetera, et cetera. I never wanted to live the American dream when I was 7 years old. I just wanted my culture and my family. And so the educational system really upholds our patriarchal, cis, heteronormative, white supremacy ideology and convinces its students that to excel looks this way. And if you don't conform, then you're a failure. So this is something that I've been unpacking, and I have a lot of thoughts, and I'm going to be writing a paper on this, and I'll be happy to share with you as I continue to explore this. But there's a part of me that really is heartbroken of how much I've let go of my culture, of my language to become American. It's a high cost. It's a cost of sovereignty, of your own connection with yourself, with your land. And then it's no wonder when we're kind of stripped away from so much of what it is to really be us, that we culturally appropriate and we take what is not ours, right? Maybe not, it's no wonder, but I definitely see it as a connection there. So I'll be exploring that, and I'll be sharing it on Facebook or on Patreon or wherever else if you're curious about my unpacking this. And maybe this will inspire you to think about your own intersecting identities and what each of those identities bring to the table and what it really means and the cost of conforming. Because proximity to the expectedness of our culture is privilege. The more that we can be in proximity with whiteness, the more we can be in proximity with masculine ideals, the more we can be in proximity with heteronormative ideals, right? The more privilege we get. But it comes at a very deep cost. And looking at that cost is critical to owning our pain, healing our pain, and then doing something with our pain, and being a really whole individual. And this is something that Kate and I explore, not about identity, but about pain and failure, and what our society likes to make these things mean, and how we can navigate it in a way that feels really nourishing to us. I'm really excited for you to be listening in on this interview because Kate is fabulous. But first, let me read you her bio. Kate Swoboda, aka Kate Courageous, is creator of YourCourageousLife.com, author of The Courage Habit, and director of the Courageous Living Coach certification. Her work has appeared in Forbes, Business Insider, Mind Body Green, The Daily Love, USA Today, and more. And she's excited about how we can live more courageous lives and to create a more courageous world. You can find her all over social media by searching Kate Courageous, and you can find her work at www.yourcourageouslife.com. You can also get this information in the show notes. As you're listening to this podcast episode, I want you to think about your own relationship with failure. What have you made failure mean in the past? How has the fear of failure prevented you from taking action? And what are you willing to do now that you've heard this interview to change your relationship with failure so that you can go out and really step into who you are fully? Yeah? Let's bring Kate on. All right. We're live. Hi, Kate. Welcome to Reclaim. Thanks for joining me on this beautiful day.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
You know, it's so funny. I actually think that your name is Kate Courageous. Like, I don't understand. If you have another name, I don't understand that, because to me, Kate Courageous feels like who you are. And I'm an admirer of your work. I love the conversations that you have. And I'm curious, why courageous? Why courage? Why even go into that realm?
Well, Kate Courageous, because everybody needs a superhero name, right? And
yes.
So the courage thing for me clicked ages ago, I was, this before I was fully a coach and everything, like, my real last name is Swoboda, Swoboda, always know when a telemarketer is calling because they're like, sweat, can I speak with Kate Sweat? You know, like totally know that. And basically I did something that for me was a big risk at the time, which is that on just like a little part-time teaching salary, I saved up enough money to go to Italy for the summer. And I was there in Italy. It was a big risk in the sense that I was like not having any income all summer long. Couldn't teach summer school, living in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, super expensive rent, yada, yada, yada. And I had this this Facebook post that I put out where I was like so happy, and like somebody came along kind of wet blankety after and was like, well, you know, not everybody can go to Italy and this and that and the other. And like, of course I know that. But the thing that was great was the connection I made after that comment, that this person who I happened to know, that the difference between us was not just circumstantial in the sense that that person had a lot more access to money and job security than I had at the time, but that the big difference between us is that I had decided, like, I'm going to take this risk. And this was something that, you know, and this is kind of how life can be. Other people want things. What becomes the differentiating factor aside from circumstances? Why is it that sometimes people don't go after things that they want even when they have the resources to do so? And the big thing that came up is it's courage. And I got really curious about that. And you know how you look at life like in hindsight and you start going, oh, that's how it felt for me. I realized I had been scared so many times and that had never gone away, but that anything that was really great in my life had happened because I had in fact practiced courage. That was the differentiating factor. So I define courage as, courage is you're feeling afraid, you dive in anyway, and you transform. And I know that those are very like high vibe, personal growthy, you know, phrases and words and everything, but I really do mean them. I really do mean whatever you're trying to do in life. Like, how do we feel afraid? Because we're not going to get out of that part. Dive in anyway, and then transform. Transform as in not life is perfect, but transform as in you leaned in on behalf of something that mattered to you.
I love that. And I can so resonate with when I look back at my life and I see the moments that kind of changed everything, that opened me up in some bigger way. It all came as a result of me taking an action that was a risk.
Absolutely.
And getting out of my comfort zone. And ironically, my first trip alone, I was living in London, I was living abroad, and my first trip alone, without a friend, without family, was to Italy. And it was a big, scary deal because I didn't speak the language and I didn't know anybody, and I didn't have the cell service that we have now. So I didn't have any of that. And I still remember that trip as one of the most important trips of my life.
Yeah. I mean, it's, I mean, I get that in the grand scheme of all the things that one can do with a life, this is a tiny thing. That was just the opening moment for me. And it really has been, it's been a like really fun thing to I love hearing people's stories, frankly. I love hearing people's stories about things that they were afraid to do and they leaned into it. And I love it when people are really real about the fact that they're afraid to do things. And I don't know, almost allergic to this kind of like what I see as like prototypical uber masculine, like hustling, playing it cool, like it's all cool, you know, you just gotta work. And like no, like it's more like have the idea, get inspired, feel totally fucking afraid, wonder who the hell am I to do any of this? Who's going to listen to me? Who's going to think I know anything? It's already been done before by that other person and probably better. I'll be laughed at. How will I have the money? How will I have the time? Da, da, da. And then
that was amazing how that came out.
Was this like a little my courageous spoken word riff for the day?
And then we just do it. And then we just do it.
Yeah. And you fail. And then the whole inner litany of voices happens again. And then you work and then you fail. And then the voices happen again. But you get some wins along the way. And that's what makes it worth it.
Yeah. So let's talk about the fail, because that's why most people don't want to take the risk in the first place, is that they don't want to fail. So what do we do once we failed? I mean, I know personally I've made it mean so many things about me when I failed, because we don't often talk about failure.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and have you ever noticed, Kate, that when we do talk about failure, it always comes with a bow wrapped at the end? It's never, Edison failed 10,000 times, right? But then he made the light bulb, so that was fine. But what about the failures that we never really resurrected from? What about the failures where it wasn't tied in some neat, pretty bow? Like, doesn't that have inherent value also?
Well, I think there's tying it in a bow that's spiritual bypass, and then there's tying it in a bow that's actually, and this is for my book. It was so fun. I hung out on Google Scholar, like reading, research and stuff into behavior and habit formation and everything. And I mean, it actually is part of emotional resilience to make meaning of our experiences. And I think that's where some of the pretty bow stuff comes. But for sure, in the example you just gave, you're absolutely right in that the emphasis goes to the win instead of what's it actually like to be in those hard times and to feel like I'm losing faith or I don't know what I'm doing. That is a really, really difficult thing.
Yeah, I hear that. And so I would love to hear your journey of how do you navigate that? How do you navigate that without getting lost in that? How can you allow yourself to be okay in the fail and not succumb to the feelings of that means that I am a failure?
Mm. Well, I think that it starts with being really real about the feelings. Um, it's like there's this, and this is where we get into the nice pretty bow thing. I mean we have to access the body. We just have to. Like, it's this thing. Like, I don't know how many times I used to debate with healers or coaches or therapists or anybody I'd work with, like this. This is a while ago, about crying or about fully getting out my anger and catharsis within the container of being able to do something productive with it. But I mean, I think that's part of it. I think, you have a failure of some kind and you go ahead and you spend 3 days or a week or whatever licking your wounds. Like, you grieve the loss of the thing that you really, really wanted that didn't turn out the way that you expected. And you go into the part that, where you're like, I feel betrayed by this. I feel like, this, I mean, I think we're all kind of conditioned around this God complexy kind of way of thinking, where if you're just good enough, good things happen to you. And of course, that's not how the world works, and that's not how it really goes, but we like to believe it. And I think we need some time to just like rail against that, to cry and to be pissed that we did our best and the system or a person or our own best efforts or bad circumstances, whatever it is, wasn't enough. And we need that time to actually be angry. And then there's a certain sort of cap on that, because at a certain point it can become wallowing in your pain and just getting stuck in your pain, and it's not productive. And whether you have an internal compass that turns that around for you, or an external compass, like a friend stepping in and doing an intervention and going like, hey, hun, you gotta like, gotta like get out of your sweats and like go do something new here. Um, that's a part of the process as well. So how do we not get stuck? How do we navigate it and not get stuck in it? I'd say, if you know that you don't have a good internal compass for that, if that's a skill set you need to develop, you need the external compass. I personally, I've got a pretty good internal compass. If we want to talk about failure or things that one could do better in life, I deviate more towards the I can outwork anything, like that's like a thing that I need to watch in my life. Like I can outwork anybody, I can outwork my way past the
Oh,
pain.
I know that so well.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's like, oh no, it's not a failure yet. I just haven't worked hard enough yet. I just need to do a little more. And that of course is its own trap. So I'm really good at not getting into the space where I wallow in my pain too much. I'm actually not as good at the part where I keep trying to work it instead of letting it the fuck go and feeling how that thing is that didn't work out.
It's so interesting how when we look at why we are this way, how it's so neatly tied to how we addressed failure when we were children. And how
Mm-hmm.
often we were told that if we failed, that meant that we were bad. That, if we drew on the wall and we broke rules, that meant that we sacrificed some lovability. And of course, we don't want to sacrifice love. We would do anything for love. And so we internalize this idea that failure equals bad. And how I love your work and I love this conversation because I feel like it is so, so critical that we begin to detach any notion of our worth with our success rate, with whether or not we achieved something or whether or not we just went after something.
Yeah, and it's hard because, any of the people who conditioned us were just other people who were conditioned. They're not like the evil
Absolutely.
villains. They're
Yes.
just more people. And I had this experience because I think about these things, and I'm a parent. My daughter, as of us talking, is about 3.5 years old. And I think, like, how do I subvert the paradigm as her parent? Because of course I also am going to, if she colors on the wall, gonna be pissed. Like, damn it, colored on the wall. Like, it's another thing to have to, like, deal with. And I was thinking, we went hiking with some friends of ours a couple weeks ago, and I loved something that I saw them do that I thought, oh, that kind of upends the paradigm. Which is that we were hiking and one of their kids like tumbled off of something, and the two of them, instead of rushing over to like give her hugs and everything, the first thing they did was both of them burst into applause. It was like, what? Like what, and for a minute, and then they went over and they gave the affection, and I realized that through watching that what they were trying to do was like not make failure into like, oh, something's wrong here, you need cuddles, you need to be raised back up, but instead to make failure as in, she tumbled off of something, like, oh my god, look at you, you tried, you fell down, but you know what, we got this. Like, and it's like, that's a good way of doing things, so I borrowed it. Now I'm
I
doing it with
love
my daughter.
that.
Yeah.
I love that. I saw some infographic online where instead of saying to your child, be careful, you invoke more critical thinking by telling them, have you considered this? Make sure you notice that. Notice what's happening here. Or have you thought about what you're going to do if this happens? Just as a way for us to begin to play with risk taking from the perspective of, instead of being careful, can we cultivate an understanding of what we have to watch out for in a way that is loving and supportive. And I feel I just love that you're playing with breaking the paradigms of risk taking and failure with your daughter, because I feel like that can change so much in the next generation of what's possible in humanity.
Yeah. I mean, like, I know of the graphic that you're invoking. I know of what you speak in terms of that being related to certain parenting paradigms. And one of the big things I try to do with my daughter is actually less about the discussion and more about normalizing the humanness that we are. So it's like, I
Mm.
don't know, like if I get into a tiff with my husband, and she's around for it, and if she says something like, you guys, she says what she sees at preschool, and you are not supposed to talk to people like that, you need to take a breath, and my husband is standing there, and we're looking at each other in the kitchen like, oh geez, we've been nailed, and like stopping and taking a moment and saying to her, like everything they're teaching her at preschool is absolutely true, so I'm glad they are, and saying to her, yeah, you know what, you're right, but right now both of us are feeling pretty frustrated, because like I'm not into that whole thing that frankly that I think her preschool is trying to push, of like almost like botting kids and making them these like perfectly respectful communicators. Like, I think it's fine if she understands that, like, sometimes in life, you're just fucking pissed at someone and you're not watching how you're talking. And yes, it's an ideal world, but like, I don't want her to be reined in either. God, it's like so many nuances though, you know?
It is. It
It can
really,
go
really
too
is.
far in one direction in any direction you go.
I mean, you're going to fuck her up as a parent in some
Oh, yeah.
capacity.
Yeah, absolutely. We don't save for college, we save for the therapy bills.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And so digging into this idea of, okay, so I failed. I recognize that I failed. I'm, supporting myself in the failure. How do we then get back up and try again? I feel like so many times, again, because we make failure mean something about ourselves, then we're like, okay, well then I'm not going to try that again. And yet we see how important resiliency is. And I love the word emotional resilience, and I use that language a lot in my work as well. And so this relates to that as well, like the risk of being vulnerable, of telling someone how you feel, the ability to bounce back from more uncomfortable emotions. I would love to hear your thoughts around that.
You know, how do we get back up again? If this idea that like courage is like a muscle, it's not something you're born with. It's something that you choose to practice, and it's something that you get better at the more often you practice, which means you fall down a lot, you get back up a lot as well. And when I was writing my book, The Courage Habit, when I was really looking at what are the habits that put together cultivate emotional resilience, there were 4 in particular that really emerged from the research. And this like crosses all the different disciplines. This isn't just like one therapeutic modality or one behavioral science discipline saying this. You know, they're all kind of saying like these are like the big 4. I think of them as the big 4. And it's touching base on like all the things you just brought up, because one thing I heard in what you just brought up was about the stories that we tell ourselves, like when we get into this I'm not enough thing. So for me, the courage habit is first, you got to access the body, which we already touched base on. Like, you've got to have the time to cry. You've got to have that time. That's part of the getting back up process. That's not part of falling down. That's actually part of how you prime to get back up. So you need that time to access the body. And then you listen without attachment to the internalized narratives or stories. And you get curious about them. And listening without attachment is like if you've ever like been out and like there was somebody who was drunk on the corner and they're just saying shit, and you might have compassion for them, or you might immediately be like, you don't know what you're talking about, but basically you understand that this person is like probably a good person when they're not drunk. Like they're a human being just like you and me. They've got life, and they've got a reason why they got shit faced, and they're wounded. And all the stuff they're saying right now, like you might hear it, but you don't then make your next life decision based on it. And that is how I think we need to regard the internalized critic or the voices in our heads in order to develop more emotional resilience. You've got to hear that voice that says you're never going to make it or you failed. And then you've got to go, all right, so I'm hearing it. I'm understanding that that's coming from a place of woundedness and being hurt. And then I reframe into a less limiting place, which is not positive affirmations, which are not my jam, but rather something that's like very pragmatic, like, okay, so you're never going to make it. Can I know that that's true? No, I can't. So at this point, I'll reframe into, it seems like I'm not going to make it for quite some time from this vantage point, but I'm willing to keep trying, which is just rooted in a lot of pragmatism. And then I think you got to have your community. I mean, like, social factors are huge. So I think when you're trying to get back up again and you've done as much of the internalized work as you can do, it's like you gotta have your girlfriends or your best friends or your people that you reach out to and you go, this thing happened that completely sucks. I can't see the forest for the trees. Help.
I love that. And I love how pragmatic and pragmatically rooted you are. And I feel like in this conversation, part of what I think makes us so afraid of failure, or maybe afraid of success, or maybe a combination of both, is this idea of your success is inevitable. And I see this a lot, this conversation a lot. Your success is inevitable. If you go after your dreams, you will achieve those dreams. You know, the universe is conspiring to support you. And therefore, if you want something, you will make it happen. And while there's so much good in there, and there's so much juice, and sometimes that can give us so much vitality, what are we really saying then about people who die without having achieved their dreams? What are we really saying about, you know, if we never feel like the universe is conspiring for our desires, or we chase our desires all our lives and it never manifests into the success that we want? And I feel like we have to be so careful with that language when we talk about success, because it may paint the wrong narrative and give people some confounded illusions about their capacity.
Yeah, like success within context. And that's part of why I'm not a fan of positive affirmations. I'm sorry, Trayvon Martin did not, quote unquote, attract being killed. Jews did not attract the Holocaust. Like, it's just, and, you know, so it's like, I don't even go down that road. I mean, the only extent to which I'm really into, you know, that law of attraction sort of positive affirmations is the sense in which, like, it makes common sense to me that if you are a kind person, probably you will attract, air quotes, you know, other kind people. But beyond that, I'm not so much. But you know, I think you're right. And if we take any of these platitudes about success, you're going to find grains of truth in them, and you're also going to find that every single pithy platitude out there can be used or manipulated in order to bypass doing the work. I mean, on one level, do I believe that if you want it badly enough, you're going to find a way to get it? Yeah, absolutely. For sure. And though there's the context that along the way, like based on my skin color or the country I grew up in or a whole host of other factors, my wanting it bad enough and journey might be a little easier than somebody else's. And, you know, I would never discount that. And I think it's a real disservice to not do that. And then the other thing I think too, if I'm going to get mouthy about it, which I suppose I already am, is the success, the idea, like even with all the platitudes, when the way you just did, like how you listed them all out and everything, I don't know. I feel like they always point to this idea of success as being this mountaintop that you arrive at, and like you're somehow hierarchically above all others, or that's the ethos that's often behind them. And to me, like, privilege should be used in the greater good of something. Like, I guess the example I'll give is that I'm vegan, and that it annoys the shit out of me to see quote unquote vegan activism that does nothing for people who have no access to food, and does nothing for people who are living in food deserts, that does nothing for people who are, you know, dealing with any of the effects of the factory farming model.
Well, and the majority of our farming is done by brown bodies. Very, you know,
absolutely, and the cesspools of waste that's left behind by those, you know, factory farms they're certainly not in rich neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So to see someone, you know, saying, I mean, my reasons for being vegan are certainly not about the taste. I think meat is delicious, and anybody who says otherwise probably not telling you the truth. But I think it's wonderful tasting. But like the communities that meat disproportionately impacts, and the climate change issues, and how people who don't have as much access are going to be impacted by that. It's like we have to do something. I have the privilege to be able to go, I'm going to eat a vegan, you know, predominantly organic, sustainably raised diet among my local food sellers and things like that. Not everybody has that privilege. So it's your job when you have that kind of privilege, access, and resources. And it's in fact part of the celebration to go, okay, I'm going to make a choice that's different, that will create a ripple effect that makes other people's lives differently. That's really important to me. And
yeah, I love that you said success is not some sort of mountain that you climb, because I think that is how we tend to view people who have more, and then we view people who don't have who have less or don't have at some bottom of the mountain, and therefore we have to look up. We look up to the people that are higher than us, right? We buy the books of people who make millions and billions of dollars to learn how they did it, and we put them on this pedestal where we're not really acknowledging the factors that went into their success that probably were completely outside of their capacity to do what they did. And if we're not understanding that, then I think we're putting our money and our expectation on the wrong thing. And it means that we all need to be looking at success in the same way. If it's a mountain to climb, then it's the same mountain. So your success should look like this. And I think that undermines the fact that a lot of people view success differently. And we should honor that, and not everyone wants to make millions and millions of dollars, and that's totally fine. And not everybody wants to do a podcast or write a book or do anything else. And that doesn't mean not everybody wants to leave their 9-to-5 job, right? And it doesn't mean anything about them.
Yeah, I mean, I have a blog post somewhere in my archives that was like talking about love for the wing women. And I was just thinking about it from the perspective of women, it just happens to have been women that I've worked with in my company who have had varying support roles, who have no interest whatsoever in any of the kind of more visible things that I'm doing, but they love being part of something that they feel like is creating a better world, and they love doing the work, and they love the community. And I think that we really as a society, we just equate way too much stuff to whatever's visible. And I
love that.
It's really an overrated, pressure-driven way to live if you make it about the visibility. And I think doing work that's meaningful to each of us as individuals is where the greater game is played.
Yeah, I love that. I want to shift gears a little bit, because right before we started recording, you mentioned the conversation of joy, and that's where your edges have been. And I want to make sure that we talk about this, because this idea of joy can sometimes feel so superfluous, and we get so caught up in the work that we forget that the whole point of all of this is to experience joy, elation, happiness, and lightness. So I'm curious how you've been relating with the topic, the concept of joy.
Well, the thing that has emerged. So I was at this dinner, and with a little motley crew of great people, and somebody at the dinner was talking about what they wanted to create in their lives, and the importance of clarity of vision. And I started to share about some things that I had been super clear on the vision, numbers I wanted to hit for my launches, and financial goals, and all these different things that I was like, I'm going to do, this is what I want. I'm super clear. And it hadn't come to fruition that I'd seen. So what did they make of that? And it ended up being this whole discussion about how we create things that we want in our life, and how we have faith along the way, which is, totally clearly I hang out with people both at dinner parties and on podcasts to talk about basically the same thing.
I love it.
It's the best. And basically what came out of that conversation was I realized that for these things that I had really, really wanted, I had actually been very clear about my vision, but I hadn't been crystal locked in on my commitment. There had always been a part of me that had been holding my breath in case it didn't work out. So it's I don't know, I just think back to my dating days ages ago, more than a decade ago. You meet that guy, at least for me, it was always a guy who they'd live with you, they'd open up, department store accounts with you, they'd, do all the things, but putting a ring on it, actually getting married, that kind of commitment, it was holding something in reserve just in case. And I realized that I had been doing that with a lot of things in my life, including, and this kind of shocked me to realize, was with my business. Which is crazy, because you'd think by the time you're running a coach certification program and, like you have a book deal and da da da. You'd think the way it worked out in my logical mind 10 years ago, at least, is like, oh, you're going to be like perfectly secure when you get there. You're not going to you're not going to be 95% in, but then like 5% of you kind of going, I don't know, what if this coaching thing doesn't work out? But that's absolutely what I was doing. And that 5% was actually like the gateway to the biggest joy. Like if I could just give myself wholeheartedly with joy to this endeavor, then it just completely opened up. And that was something I started looking at. And I started looking at just like very coachy, very categorically, right? Like we do these coachy exercises with our clients around values and stuff. What are your values for money? And what are your values for your marriage? And what are your values as a parent? And I started doing that with everything. I started going, where in my life do I hold my breath just in case? Don't want to get my expectations up too high. Don't want to, gotta be realistic, Like where am I always trying to like almost construct and do perfectly how I both vision into something and then monitor my disappointment, which is like it fucking exhausting. And something shifted for me there where I was like, oh, like you can imagine now I'm moving all my chips to the center of the poker table. Like, oh no, game on, all chips in. And if this doesn't work out, whatever category of life I happen to be looking at, I'm going to need to feel my failure, which like completely brings us full circle. I'm going to need to cry. I'm going to need to be pissed. And I'm going to need to be like, and it really occurred to me too, when I was looking at this, that anywhere where I had ever really, really failed, that holding the breath thing had been happening. I'm thinking about like, friendships that have fallen apart, stuff like that. Like there was a part of me that wasn't fully vulnerable and fully willing to like be committed to working it out or trying to see what could happen. I was going straight into all the armor that you put on to try to avoid feeling fully rejected. Anyway, yeah. I don't know if that's too long.
No, I love that, but I'm curious, how does that connect with joy? Like what is the relationship there with going all in and with joy?
Well, that was, going all in. It's like the second I made that connection, as we say here in California, I got my download, which is like, oh, like if I'm not investing in the exhaustion of holding a part of myself in reserve, all the things that are like these little annoying things that I might sort of pull up and say, here's why this isn't making me perfectly happy, instead become like, oh, I can totally handle this, that, and the other thing. Or I can go ahead and have that difficult conversation that I needed to have with that service provider because it's not like, oh, this might not work out. It's like, let me talk to you. Of course we're going to find a way to work it out. It's like, this is what I want. Why not just like be full on, unabashed? Here it is. So like I want the business, I want the parenting, I want the marriage that leaves God speechless. I want that love and passion, and I want to in my professional life not just do one thing, and I want to take 3 months off a year and travel, and I want, like, instead of this thing of going like, oh, it'd be so nice to want that, but it's just like, I want all these things, and how fun is this? How fun is it to just be in the desire of it and then go, yeah, all right, now what am I going to work on today in service to like this life full of things that I'm excited about in the now and excited about in the future?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I feel like sometimes it's a challenge to navigate what's going on in our own lives as well as what's going on collectively. I know as our culture kind of tells us that we should be focused on our individual joy and pleasure, and that's it. This idea of being hyper individualistic and focusing on yourself. And what we see now, well, what I see now anyway, is that is in so many ways so privileged. And it's been interesting to navigate then understanding my privilege, understanding my connection with humanity, understanding how we all are feeling, deeply disconnected from each other. and also focus on my own joy, and also focus on
Mhm.
my own self-care and my own well-being. I'm curious if you ever had, those thoughts as well, and what that looks like for you.
For sure. Well, and I always feel like I'm growing on this point. And
Yeah.
and what I will say about this, focus on the individual is that I think there's a similar learning curve that we all can have around justice as the platitudes around success. Like, on one hand, absolutely, a hyper individualistic emphasis is parasitic to our culture. On the other hand, you cannot draw from an empty well. I don't have anything to give if I'm not making sure that, like, my house and home are handled.
Yeah.
And so, and joy, I think, is our birthright, and joy is, I think, why we're here. I think we're here for the whole human experience, which includes suffering, but I also think joy is why we're here. And so I think that I've been trying to really look at all of those things and go, okay, where is the nuance? Because there's definitely a line where it isn't healthy anymore, and it's not helpful. And then the other thing that I'd say too is that, like, part of the reason and this is what we started talking about before we hit record, part of the reason my joy had taken a hit was when Trump was elected. I was just like, whoa. And part of my, I was like, let's just say it, I was one of those white women who was like, what? How could this happen? And and I like, that was part of my reckoning and my unraveling, that I was one of the women, while, like, many people of color were like, why are you shocked? Like, how's this you, like you feel fucked over by the system? Well, welcome to life, and I just go, like, all right, so there was, like, a whole thing with that. And then I got really curious about how that had even been my experience to begin with. I mean, it's like I was shocked, and then I wasn't. There was a part of me that wasn't. I'm from the Midwest. I have highly conservative relatives who I know for a fact voted for Trump. And it's like, what do you, it's like, yeah. How I really think that we do something that's actually good with our pain is by processing our pain. That, like, took me a moment to say, and because otherwise I think that it just starts to grind us down into a fine powder. And those of us who have access to resources to help us through our pain need to take them on an individual level to create a ripple effect of something else. Like it is a commitment for me now, and this is a reckoning that I've had. Before he was elected, I for sure had political opinions. I even aired them, but not to any great degree, because I had this idea that business and politics should be somehow separate. And now I'm like, no, actually, it was my fucking job as somebody who had a platform to speak up and out, and to give voice to other people who were speaking up and out about problems within the system, about how an internalized kind of oppressive fear might keep you from going after something or doing something for the wider world that could be of benefit, that could free up other people. Like, it's part of our job, any of us who do have some kind of access to a platform or resources or whatever, to basically be megaphones, because that's how you create a system where the only thing that people aren't hearing is whatever Fox News is saying, and there's no one to counter that. That's disturbing to me.
Yeah. So what has that journey looked like, in that awakening of understanding how, our whiteness is a problem, and also how to find joy in that? Not in that, but in our lives.
I was going to say, I don't know that I find joy in whiteness being
no.
Hold on. How do we find joy despite the fact that the world suffers?
Thank you for putting that in such a beautiful way.
Well, and I mean, the thing that I go to, frankly, is I mean, if I identify with any religion, it's with Buddhism. And really what we're talking about is an age-old problem. How do we I mean, it's an existentialist problem as well. If we go to existential psychology, how do we be happy, in a way that doesn't, that isn't naive and oblivious to people suffering in a world where people deeply, deeply suffer? And for me, the answer comes back to processing through the pain.
Yeah.
So when, I mean, there are a million examples that I could come up with at this point, but, I'll just give the example of the girls who were captured, Boko Haram, now more than 2 years ago. I don't think they're all still back. Although I did read something just within the past couple of weeks that a great many of them have actually been found. I mean, like if I'm going to be present to the fact that they go through the pain that they go through, if I'm going to not have social media frying my nerves, and if I'm going to actually fucking up and do something about it, then I can't have my own fear and pain and shock about what they're going through as like this thing that is in my way. So basically it's like access the body. It's the courage habit. It's taking this like fucking insane thing that's happened in front of the whole world, that like, people go to war over oil, but they certainly don't go to war over women who are captured while trying to get an education and then raped into a religion.
Yeah.
I need to cry, and I need to like scream into a towel, and I need to access the body. I need to feel all those things. And then I need to listen without attachment to that voice that tells me that me saying something about it, well, it's not going to change anything for any of those people.
Right.
And I need to reframe it, and then I need to reach out and create community. And that means talking to people about what I can do, or talking to people about the things that I know and trying to share and trying to make it a network. And is that going to save any of those girls? No, it's not. But at least for me, I like to think that if I were trading places with any of them, the worst thing would be being forgotten.
Yeah.
The worst thing would be like nobody remembering. Because at that point, when you're forgotten, it's like, where's even your humanity?
Yeah.
None of what I'm talking about here is going to save people from the worst things that life can dish up, but it at least will equip me to do something other than just hiding out going, I can't look at Facebook anymore, it's too hard, or something. Or if I can't look at Facebook anymore, then my action needs to be empowering somebody else who has, can get vocal on my behalf. Yeah. There's something we need to do with the suffering we feel to process through it. That's what we do to be happy in a world where people suffer.
That's very powerful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. I hope I wasn't too ranty.
Oh no, it was divine. It was really beautiful. So any final thoughts on courage before we wrap up?
I always like reminding people, whenever I'm thinking of a final thought, of believing in the power of 5 minutes. I think there's this thing we think we need to do with courage where like it's all or nothing. We got to like bust out and be really like, like, I don't know, jumping out of planes with parachutes and all that stuff. Or like, the single-handedly revolutionizing a social ill or something like that. It all feels too big. And it's like, how about your 5 minutes of courage, if you're listening to this and you know exactly what I'm talking about, and, with whatever social thing you're thinking about that just is maddening to you that the world won't do more about, and you go and you cry it out, or you scream into a towel if you're angry. You like try to get some of that emotion up and out so that the next thing you can do is go, where do I limit myself around this and think I can't be part of change? And then how do I shift that? And who do I need to reach out to? Or how do we get something collective going where it's not just me? And that starts in 5 minute increments. Nobody does it in one fell swoop.
Thank you. I love that.
Thank you.
Amazing, Kate. Thank you so much. Thank you. I keep wanting to say thank you. I'm grateful for you and for your message and for the work that you do and for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Likewise. Thank you for having me. I love having the conversation.